Welcome to Bible for Modern Minds podcast.
Today we're taking a stack of sources detailing one individual's decade-long journey, and it's a really powerful one.
It is.
We're talking about a radical personal transformation, a path that wound through years of acute mental health crisis, deeply held philosophical skepticism.
And ended with what can only be described as a dramatic, almost violent spiritual reckoning.
That's the mission for this deep dive.
Right. Our source material is this very candid testimony from a former atheist who was now a pastor. And we're going to trace the very specific and often tragic chain of events.
So for you, the listener, the goal is pretty simple. We want to understand how growing up in, seemingly suburban normality in 90s Southern California.
How that devolved into 5 years of just pure internal devastation.
And what specific sensory experience finally broke his deeply intellectual commitment to atheism. It's that paradox we really want to explore today.
Yeah, how a life that looked so stable on the outside, so secure, could just crumble so totally.
Leaving him with, literally nothing to stand on. Let's set the stage in what he calls the golden era.
He describes his early life as, well, picture perfect.
Right. Southern California suburbs in the 90s. We're talking Nintendo, playing outside.
Loving parents, a good childhood, everything felt predictable.
But that stability was kind of masking a very fragile spiritual foundation.
Oh, completely. He notes minimal early religious exposure. There were, occasional visits to a Spanish-speaking Catholic church when he was very young.
But he didn't understand the language.
Right. And the detail I love is that the main reason his parents stopped going was purely practical.
The air conditioning.
The church wouldn't turn on the air conditioning in the summer, so his faith at that point was just mumbled prayers that felt like they were literally bouncing off the ceiling.
There was just no rooting there.
Yeah.
And that lack of spiritual depth becomes so important when life, inevitably hits a speed bump.
Well, it did. Everything was fine until high school.
Yeah.
Gets into his first serious committed relationship.
And the source says he made a fundamental psychological mistake here. He put all of my eggs into that basket.
100%. He was completely focused on the idea that this relationship was his forever. And that kind of tunnel vision, it's common, but in his case, the consequences were extreme.
He neglected schoolwork, stopped planning for a career.
And most importantly, he let his friendships just wither away.
So when that relationship ultimately ended, the devastation was just total.
It was the first real shock to his world.
And here's the kicker. Because he'd isolated himself and poured his entire self-worth into one person, when he needed that support structure, it was gone.
Exactly. He explicitly states that there was no foundation in the Lord to stand upon, but you're right, there were also no friendships left to catch him.
And that heartbreak, which is, normal and painful for any teenager, it immediately morphed into something much more dangerous.
Acute, corrosive loneliness, and the timing was just brutal. It's the end of high school, social media is exploding.
So he's seeing everyone else connecting, moving on, and he's just stuck.
And he internalized this lie, this destructive voice constantly saying, "You're alone and nobody cares about you."
What's so devastating about that is that he knew, intellectually, it wasn't true. He says his friends would have come running if he'd just called them.
But that emotional lie, that feeling of isolation, it just overcame all rational thought. And that's when the descent into clinical, full-blown depression really started.
It didn't take long at all.
Yeah.
We see him drop out of college, completely unable to function. He actually failed a final in a class where he had an A.
Simply because he physically could not get out of bed to take the exam. The will to act was just gone.
He knew he needed help, though, and that led him through the medical and therapeutic system.
He was seeing psychiatrists. They were changing his meds weekly, trying to find something, anything that worked.
But nothing did. And then there was the counselor.
Yes, the counselor. And we have to pause here because the advice she gave him is genuinely shocking.
I couldn't believe it when I read it.
This non-Christian counselor looks at this young man struggling with this profound emptiness and isolation and tells him the solution is to sow your royal oats.
Wait, hold on. A professional licensed counselor actually suggested the cure for a deep emotional vacuum was shallow transactional hookups.
That was the advice. Fix your life by finding multiple girls and sleeping with them. A purely physical solution. It just speaks to the utter brokenness of the help he was getting.
It's wild. And what's fascinating is that even as an atheist, as a rational skeptic, he instinctively recoiled from that.
He felt deep down, this was not the answer. He had this like natural moral alarm bell that still worked, despite his whole framework.
It shows you that need for genuine connection over superficial pleasure.
But he didn't have a better path, so the depression just got deeper. He took a job at Foot Locker and Champs, basically an 8-hour distraction just to get out of bed.
Moving out on his own made it worse.
Oh, way worse. It accelerated the isolation, and that led to frequent, almost constant suicidal ideation, and multiple attempts, so many he actually lost count.
The descriptions he gives us from this time are just incredibly difficult. He talks about driving on the freeway, consciously steering his truck toward the center divider.
And only pulling back because he saw another family or children nearby. The thought of harming someone innocent was the one thing that kept him tethered.
That flicker of empathy is so crucial. But the personal suffering continued. He stood for hours on the edge of a mountain cliff, just paralyzed, thinking about jumping.
This wasn't a fleeting sadness. This was prolonged internal warfare.
And the self-harm. It escalated to a terrifying level.
Yeah. The instance at his parents' house, he grabbed the biggest kitchen knife he could find. He cut himself so deep he believed he saw white connective tissue inside his chest.
Just a literal river of blood. And he says he just didn't care about his own life anymore. It's hard to imagine a deeper pit of hopelessness.
That kind of profound disregard for self-preservation is terrifying. Fortunately, the intervention finally came.
From his ex-girlfriend, the original source of the pain. She called the authorities.
And a police officer arrived and was actually about to let him go. But in one last desperate moment of honesty, the speaker broke his silence.
He said, "Officer, I'm not okay. I want to kill myself."
And that single confession led to the psych ward. It was the first time his parents really understood the 5-year war he had been fighting completely alone.
So out of that crisis, he goes back to college. And this is where the story takes another strange turn.
Right. He starts taking science classes, genetics, biology, anatomy, and he finds a genuine passion for them.
He loves the logic, the structure, the verifiable nature of it all.
But ironically, this new love for science, it didn't lead him toward belief. It cemented his atheism.
He concluded that the meticulous kind of cold portrayal of scientific knowledge made an active, caring God seem impossible.
He internalized it into this final emotional conclusion. If God does not show his love towards me, certainly nobody else is, and he does not exist.
So his intellectual skepticism becomes this fortress protecting the emotional wound of isolation.
And while he did reconnect with friends, he became the designated driver for the club scene. It was just another distraction. That gaping hole in his heart was still there.
Which brings us to the pivotal character in the story.
His lab partner. In anatomy and physiology, the class where they were literally cutting up brains and eyeballs.
And she invited him to church.
His initial reaction was, as he puts it, probably the quickest no that I've ever said in my life.
But she was bold. 10 minutes later, she asked him again.
And the answer only switched from no to yes because of the most non-spiritual phrase imaginable.
There's also free pizza at this church.
It's incredible. Free food was the only thing that could bypass years of his intellectual resistance.
So he goes. He ends up at Crossroads Christian Church, and it's a total culture shock. Bang drums, electric guitars, fog machines.
He thought he'd walked into a rock concert, not a service, especially compared to his silent, non-AC Catholic experience.
But here's the crucial part. This was not an instant conversion.
Not at all. He was persistent. He attended for 4 or 5 months straight, still an atheist, reading the Bible for the first time.
Getting stuck at Genesis 11 and seeing no real change. He was waiting for God to prove the science wrong. And, well, nothing was happening.
What's fascinating is his commitment to staying isolated even while he was there. His lab partner stopped going, but he kept going. Alone.
He'd sit in the very back, behind the sound booth, hat pulled low, doing everything he could to avoid eye contact.
But the community was persistent. People would routinely approach him, ask him to sit with them week after week. They showed him love, even when he declined.
God was using the persistence of his people, even when he was still waiting for God himself.
And then came the final turning point. A random Wednesday night. He didn't sit in the back. He felt compelled to move closer to the middle.
The pastor gave the familiar altar call. If God is doing something in your heart, a phrase he'd heard every week for months.
But this time, it was different.
It became this highly specific, intense sensory intervention. He says he felt completely isolated in that massive theater, like a spotlight was shining only on him.
Then came the noise. A sound he could only compare to a stun grenade or a flashbang, a high-pitched, disorienting sound.
And right after that, he completely lost his breath. The air felt, in his words, vacuumed out of him. He starts panicking, weeping uncontrollably.
This wasn't a quiet conviction. This was a physical, almost violent breakdown of his control.
And in the middle of that panic came the core phenomenon.
A sudden, profound coldness surged into his chest. He described it like someone had placed a block of ice in your chest and sealed it up.
Let's stop on that detail, because it flies directly in the face of his passion for biology. Scientifically, coldness in living organs means death. It means decay.
But the paradox is that this coldness felt like the absolute opposite of death. He called it pure goodness, pure bliss, better than anything he had ever felt.
Better than his wedding day. Better than the birth of his children. It was a non-rational physical experience that just bypassed his entire intellectual fortress.
And the transformation was instantaneous. A thought popped into his mind, clear as day. There is a God, and he sees you, and he loves you.
The lie of isolation was just gone, replaced. When he walked out to the altar, he noticed nobody clapped or cheered. But he didn't care.
He didn't need that external validation anymore because he knew the truth for himself internally.
And the change was profound and lasting. He calls it a supernatural deliverance from depression months later. He details the very last time he self-harmed.
After his conversion, he cut himself one more time, but this time the reaction was immediate. He gained power over it. He looked in the mirror full of joy and said, "This isn't you anymore." The compulsion was broken.
This new path even upended his life goals. He'd worked so hard to get into Loma Linda University's competitive medical program.
And he got in with a 3.7 GPA, not the usual 4.0, largely based on his statement of faith.
But just before he started, he felt this deep discomfort, a compulsion to quit and pursue ministry instead.
And the response from the dean was incredible. Instead of being angry about the wasted spot, he sat down and prayed with him. He affirmed his calling.
That kindness cemented his path, and he eventually became a senior pastor, guiding people out of the same darkness he endured.
So what does all this mean for you, for the listener, whether you're skeptical or struggling or a longtime believer?
He gives some very specific advice. To the atheists and skeptics, he urges them not to be an atheist out of ignorance.
Yeah, study the other side. Look at the arguments for the resurrection, the evidence for God's existence. As he learned, there's a lot of it.
And maybe the most vital message is for the friends and parents of those who are struggling. He says, do not give up.
He mentions a specific text message from a friend that stopped him during an attempt. Your encouraging words and your friendship does make a difference.
This whole journey highlights how absolute loneliness can override logic, training, even the instinct for self-preservation.
But it also shows that years of deeply held intellectual skepticism can be dissolved instantly by a personal, physically undeniable experience.
And finally, a powerful message for longtime believers who might feel their quiet faith is less exciting.
The speaker stresses this. Don't be jealous of dramatic testimonies. Your life of walking in the light, avoiding the scars of the world that people like him accumulated, that's not boring. It is a tremendous blessing.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. Based on the